Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Oh, hey, welcome back. So, we've got a new employee today. He's not a real person. Actually, he's my clone. I'm not kidding. Meet Darkness 2. He's a clone of me, even with an AI voice based off of my own. Say hi, Darkness 2.
Hi there, I'm Darkness 2. You can easily tell me apart from the original Darkness because my pee-pee is far smaller than his.
I paid him to say that. Jokes aside, Darkness 2 is a bit of an experiment. You see, I want to tell more stories to you, but I usually don't have time to tell more than half an hour of new scary work stories to you every week. Those hour-long episodes are few and far between. How lame. So, Darkness 2 here is going to read some stories today. You can follow me on Twitter at Prevails and let me know what you think of Darkness 2's performance. Tell the good people thank you, Darkness 2.
Thank you, I'll do my best. I promise the cancer-causing effects caused by my voice will be tuned to a minimum.
Wait, what? Cancer-causing effects? Anyway, just keep in mind I'll always be the host and primary storyteller here. I shall not be replaced, unless a tragic accident or curse destroys my voice or something. Today's stories feature babysitting terrors, McDonald's ghosties, and more. So put that McFlurry on hold and enjoy these tales from the break room. Thunder on the Ground, from No Punks Allowed. I'd driven up to a beautiful little cabin on top of a huge, practically deserted mountain up in Baltimore, Quebec. The vastness and beauty up there is breathtaking. But there's something else up there, and I don't know what it is. Other than a few scattered neighbors on the way up to the cabin, there was no one else. It was a great job. Middle of nowhere, taking care of an 8-year-old girl, my mother's friend's daughter, who was a joy to be with, and all the pleasures a 16-year-old me could want at the time. I had a heated swimming pool connected to the back sliding balcony doors of the house, a kitchen full of food and snacks. It could feed a family of 12. And my favorite part, a great big fire pit in the middle of the yard along the side of the house. That night, I had just put Angelique to bed. It was about 10:30 p.m. by then. This was my time to relax and build a roaring fire outside as high as I wanted and sit back and watch the flames and stars. I wanted nothing more back then. It's amazing how quickly we change from being completely at ease to alert and scared beyond all belief. Now, I can't stress enough how quickly this all happened, but at the time, it felt as if time was moving through honey, if you know what I mean. The best way I can describe what happened was close your eyes and imagine yourself sitting back comfortably, wrapped in a blanket, sitting down watching a fire in front of you, totally entranced by flames. There's no sound, just crickets and the faint sound of the stream at the bottom of the mountain. No wind. But then you hear running towards the back of your chair, and it's so fast it makes it to you before you even have the chance to turn around. But when you do, there's no one there. That's what happened to me, and when I tell you that I heard running, I mean that I felt thunderous boots or hooves, definitely bipedal, coming right at me, running towards me, stopping right at the back of my chair. Well, I'm sure you've guessed by now that I screamed bloody murder on the top of that mountain. When I turned around to see who or what was there, of course, there was nothing. I couldn't run. I couldn't move for the longest time. Looking back, I don't understand why I didn't run, but I just up and stood there with my back to the fire, scared, positively stiff. Not only had this running sound come towards me, but I also noticed a dreadful, eerie silence, which made my blood run cold. I'm afraid that's where my encounter and my story ends. I ended up going in the house eventually and shutting all the blinds. I never made another night fire on my own out there after that, and, to be honest, I haven't felt quite right since then. This was a long time ago. I'm 36 now, and I remember it so clearly. I can't say I've led a horrible life, but I swear, since that night, I felt a darkness or heaviness over me. Things never really worked out throughout my life, no matter how hard I've worked at it. Love, money, parenting, the works. And I always wonder sometimes and think back to that night, asking myself exactly what or who that was, and why exactly this had happened to me. I'd been up there babysitting Angelique for over 2 years. I'd had countless hours alone up there. Then, on the stillest and most beautiful night, that thing came running right into my life, literally. If the reason was to scare me, I'd say this entity or whatever it was got what it wanted. But what if these things can create havoc in our lives? Unseen, something on a parallel plane from ours. Who knows, maybe I'm just a stoner, and I should quit smoking weed and stop thinking too much when I'm trying to go to bed. Or maybe something nightmarish really did happen to me that night. You see, ever since that night, I've never felt alone in the dark, and I always feel eyes on me, especially in the woods, where I once felt such peace, and now all I feel is on edge. I can't enjoy fresh air anymore, though I still try from time to time.
Someone was in my house, from Keir Storrow. On a clear, cool morning toward the end of summer, I woke up feeling not quite right. I didn't exactly feel sick, but I was tired and unsteady. This was almost 10 years ago, well before COVID-19. I had an office job and a boss who didn't believe in getting sick. Seriously, I had the flu and pneumonia once, and he told me I could have avoided it with vitamins and exercise. He was annoyed I had to take sick time, and he insisted for years I'd taken a vacation, despite my doctor's note proving otherwise. That being said, I didn't feel well, and I went to work anyway. This, of course, turned out to be a mistake. About halfway through my workday, I really didn't feel well. I felt dizzy, sweaty, and cold. When the shakes and the nausea started, I knew I had to get out of there. I hurriedly told my boss I had to go home. I must have looked as bad as I felt because he didn't argue and suggested I get a ride home. Honestly, he was probably right with how unsteady I felt, but I genuinely thought I might be sick on the drive home. At least if I was behind the wheel, I could pull over if I needed to without losing precious seconds trying to tell someone else to pull over. And if I didn't make it, at least I'd be sick in my own car and not someone else's. So I drove myself home. Luckily, I only lived about 20 minutes away from my workplace, and traffic was light. I barely made it home. I abandoned my cell phone, bag, and keys in the car as I hurried to get into the house and make it to the bathroom. After a few very unpleasant minutes, I heard footsteps somewhere in the house. Thinking it was one of my parents coming home early, I yelled out, "Hello, I'm home," so as not to scare the crap out of them when I popped out of the bathroom. No one answered. The footsteps got closer, and I thought maybe my mom or dad hadn't heard me. I called out, "Mom?" Nothing. "Dad?" At this point, I started to get nervous. Someone was in my house. One of my parents, or anyone we know who might have dropped in, would have answered me. Quietly, I moved toward the bathroom door and pushed the lock. The footsteps came closer, stopping right outside the bathroom door. I didn't say anything. This wasn't anyone who belonged in my house. And now they knew I was here. I didn't have my phone. There was a pair of scissors in a container, and I grabbed them, waiting just inside the door. It was the longest game of chicken I've ever experienced. Me, listening for footsteps and waiting for this person to burst through the door, and them standing outside waiting for me to come out. After what felt like a very long time, the footsteps hurried to the back of the house, down the basement stairs, and out the garage door. I waited, my heart pounding, sweat pouring down my back. Through all this, I still felt sick and shaky. As soon as I got up the nerve, I flung open the bathroom door and bolted toward the front of the house. I got in my car, keys still in the ignition, and drove down the street to a gas station. There I parked and picked up my phone. I hesitated. Who would I call? At the time, my family was a little nervous about the police. Not because of anything we did. We're not a bunch of criminals. My father had been assaulted by a police officer a short time before this incident. The guy was being investigated, but was not yet charged. We'd experienced things like creepy phone calls, cars parked on our street for hours, and feeling as if we were being followed while driving on the road. No, I was not about to call the police. I called my mother, who was down the street at my grandmother's house, and told her tearfully what had happened. She told me she would call my father, and I drove to my grandmother's house. I stayed there for the rest of the day. My father called us in the evening to tell us it was safe to come home. He told me there was no evidence that anyone had been in the house, insisting our cats must have been running around and startled me. I was furious. We've had cats for my entire life. I know the difference between cat footsteps and person footsteps. This caused tension between my father and I until he installed security cameras at each entrance into the house. I asked him about it, and he finally told me when he'd come home that day to investigate, he'd found things were missing. Among them were a court summons he'd received to appear at the trial for the police officer who had assaulted him, and a business card a detective investigating the case had given my mother. He'd believed me at the time, but he didn't want me to be afraid in my own house. So he'd downplayed it until he figured out how to make the house more secure. He'd also installed new locks on the doors and gotten us new keys, just in case.
Warning. The following story contains depictions of sexual harassment and assault. For those who did not hear my previous story, titled Mr. M's Ghost Buddies from episode 16, my name is Shiro, and I work for a small Japanese company in the States. I'm not sure if I was born unlucky or something, but weird encounters tend to follow me. Back in the early days that I was with the company, my supervisor asked me if I was interested in going to the main office in Japan for a week to see what it was like on the other side. I asked if I could extend my stay for another week for a small vacation, and she said I could, so long as I paid for my own hotel for the week. Being an anime fan who has never been to Japan, I said of course. Even if I had to pay for a hotel for a week, at least I didn't have to worry about the plane ticket. During the week before my job, I brought a new suit and tie to look presentable to my peers, and I even learned a bit of Japanese so that I could at least introduce myself. When I got there, I was giddy as a kid in a candy store, as it was my first time overseas. On my first night, nothing eventful happened, but on the second day, it was time for me to go to the main office. With my new suit on and train pass, I made my way to the station and into the platform. I saw station employees with white gloves on, waiting for the train to arrive. Once it was there, a whole crowd of people got off, and as soon as it cleared, I got on. Once I got onto the train, I felt the crowd shoving me deeper into the train, cramming us all in like a can of sardines. I had heard that the trains got crowded here, and I've even seen it on TV, but experiencing something like that is something else altogether. I just laughed to myself and thought, wow, this is the real Japanese salaryman experience. During the ride, it was quiet. I had to transfer to another train, but that was about 30 minutes after or so. At some point, suddenly though, I felt a hand brush up against my left thigh. Being from a city where buses get crammed, I just thought nothing of it. Just another passenger crushed in like me. But later on, I felt that hand moving up and down my thigh, and I realized this was no accident. I'd heard about guys who have some kind of weird fetish for filling up people on trains, but I didn't think they'd go after a guy like me. I couldn't see who was doing it. Everyone was looking at their phones or sleeping. No way to tell who was doing it since I couldn't even see below my shoulder. After realizing what was going on, I meekly muttered, "Sumimasen," sorry or excuse me in Japanese, to the other passengers on my right, signaling that I would like to move towards that side. Their faces looked mildly annoyed, but relented. I moved a few feet away from the hand, but still couldn't see whose hand it was. A few minutes later, I felt the hand again, this time more aggressive, even grabbing at my rear. I felt disgusted and powerless. I even contemplated getting violent, but decided not to, as I didn't think my boss would like to see a picture of me in the news with the headline, "American Businessman Assaults Passenger on Train." I looked up at the map and saw that my stop was next, and decided to just make a break for it when the doors opened. When I got to my station, I bolted out of there, making it to my transfer as soon as possible, admittedly slower than I would have liked, as this was my first time there, so I didn't know where to go. When I got to my second train, it was like the first. Doors open, people leave, everyone gets shoved in. I thought I was in the clear by then, but I soon felt what had to be the same hand again feeling me all over. This was so dehumanizing, and the thought that I was being reduced to an outlet for some creep's fetish was disgusting. I had to put up with this until my station, and I walked out of the train then, defeated. I turned around and saw this man in a suit just looking at me and smiling. A mixture of despair and rage filled me, but again, I didn't want to make a scene. Heck, I didn't even know if this was the same guy. I just watched as the doors closed and the train departed with that man inside. I didn't want to tell my coworkers about this either. I didn't want to worry them. The rest of the trip was fine, but I was far more careful on the train from then on. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying you should not go to Japan. It's a beautiful country with lots of great food and people. Just be careful on the trains, and if you ever find yourself in the same situation as me, but decide to act on anger and instinct instead, give that guy a good punch for me too.
McHaunting with a side of fries from Tink Tink. For security purposes, I changed my name. I don't want to go jeopardizing my good luck streak, and at least then nobody can say I didn't do my due diligence. I'm currently a manager at a local McDonald's, and whenever something inexplicable happens, I attribute it to the ghost of Ronald McDonald. When the shake machine overfills a cup, or the frappa machine makes a mess, or if the system needs a reboot, it's because of that ghost. Hey, it's less scary than La Llorona or La Lechuza, right? Besides, enough calls to ATOS and our IT guy, we're one of many franchises under the same owner, taught me pretty much how to resolve some things, except for one night. I was alone in the building, counting drawers and whatnot, but couldn't help but feel observed. Not for the first time, but it always turned out to be nothing. Once the POS close was initiated, I did a walkthrough of the floor to make sure none of the myriad closing tasks were forgotten. Appropriate devices like the grills, universal holding cabinets, the oven, and fryers were all cleaned and turned off. The fry station was clean, coffee pots emptied, trash was done, windows and doors were locked. Everything was done except for bags being stocked. I rolled my eyes and thought, great, I have to go to the creepy basement alone in the dark of night. I don't even like being in my own basement at night, but whatever. Everything was normal anyway, and it's not like anyone could get to me. Nobody ever tried before. The tasks were done unusually well, as a matter of fact. Usually, I'm having to at least empty tea urns and coffee pots. Down the steep stairs I went. Our basement tends to flood somehow, a la Moaning Myrtle probably, as the Ronald McDonald ghost doesn't mess with the water. The shelves of stock were all in their usual, if disheveled, places. The spot that creeps me out the most is directly back in the corner from the stairs, where a corrugated metal section composed the wall. I assume it was part of the remodel. That section of shelves holds our coffee-related products and McFlurry toppings. It also was near the bags I needed. As soon as I had the bundles of bags in hand, I heard a sporadic knocking on said section. I know even a restaurant isn't immune to a rodent infestation no matter how diligently we clean, but I'd never heard such a noise before. Was someone watching me? How did they know I was down here or that the metal section came down this far? Why make such a commotion if they meant to get the drop on me as I left for the night? It's not as if they'd get anything anyway, but still. I hurriedly placed the bags on the backup cart under the counter and left after that. For all I know, there could be a rational explanation, but I wasn't about to figure that out. Luckily, I have crew who can help me make sure tasks are complete before leaving next time. I know I'm certainly not going to the basement next time I'm alone in the dark. It's my greatest fear to die alone and my body not be found until sometime later.
Burger King encounter. From Anonymous. I worked at Burger King when I was in college. The assistant manager had just quit and I'd only been working for about a month when the general manager offered me the position. My shifts were weekend mornings and 3 closing shifts during the week. My friend Corey, who had gotten me hired, was the other assistant manager and was the one who trained me. It was towards the end of the 3rd night of my job shadowing him. We were done with our duties and setting the alarm when he said, "Make sure when you leave the building at night, don't come back in. They don't like that." My friend and I always joked around, so I didn't take him seriously. Everything was normal for about 3 months after that. Many employees didn't like me too much because I'd gotten the position quickly, and in my attempt for them to accept me, I often helped them complete their closing duties, which often led to me being left alone counting the till. Until this point, the only thing that worried me was getting jumped on the way to my car, since we had to take the day's deposit to the bank drop box every night. There's a wooded area between the Burger King and the highway where many homeless people sleep, and getting robbed was one of my worst fears. One weekend, Corey asked if we could switch shifts for that Saturday. He wanted to go to a concert, so he offered to work the morning shift if I would go to the night shift. I normally would have said no, but that night we had a lot of staff scheduled, so I figured I wouldn't work much, so I agreed to switch shifts. The night was pretty slow. I even sent one of the cashiers home once most of the cleaning had been done. The way the manager's office is set up makes me stand with my back to the door of the office. I was there counting money when I felt a presence behind me. I assumed it was Sam, the cashier, that was seeing what I was doing. I saw on the security cameras a car approaching, and through the headset, I heard Sam greet them and start taking the order. I still felt as if someone was behind me, and I turned to tell Sam to go input in the computer so she wouldn't mess up the order. Except when I turned, there was nobody there. I then looked through the office window that has a view of the kitchen and drive-through cashier. I saw that Sam was at the computer taking the order, and the 2 cooks were in the kitchen, one cleaning and the other waiting for the order to pop up on the screen. I didn't think much of it, and I continued to work. There was a problem with the deposit where I didn't have all the money the computer said I should have, so I started to recount everything to ensure I hadn't miscounted somewhere. I was about halfway down when everyone came to the office to say they were done and they were leaving. One of the cooks, named Mark, offered to stay with me until I was done since he knew I had to walk out with a good amount of money, but I declined and said I would be fine, so they left. I finished my work about 20 minutes later. It turns out the general manager had accidentally taken some money home in his pocket, so I would be depositing a smaller amount today. I turned the lights off in the office and walked out the back door. The back door locked by itself and was located right next to the drive-through speaker. I got to my car and I remembered I'd forgotten to set the alarm. Dang it, I mumbled. I moved my car and parked it next to the drive-through speaker. I grabbed the deposit bag and went back into the building. As soon as I entered, I felt a very different vibe from what I was used to. The air felt different. Everything was quiet. The alarm pin pad was located at the front, next to the cashiers, so I had to cross the back storage area and the kitchen to reach it. Once the pin was entered, you had about 15 seconds to get out of the building or the alarm would go off. I entered the code and began to run, and it was at that point I heard footsteps behind me, as if I was being chased. I bolted out the back door and closed it behind me. I had goosebumps, and I was a little shaken up. What the heck was that? I asked myself. I got into my car and I tried to convince myself that it was probably just the sound of my keys in my pocket that made me seem like there were footsteps behind me. I drove around the drive-through lane, and when I got to the window, I looked inside. Instantly, I regretted it. As I passed the window, I saw a black human figure looking out of it. Against my better judgment, I circled around the front of the restaurant, and, from my car, tried to see if I saw anybody inside through the front windows of the restaurant. I saw nothing, but it was at this time that I remembered I hadn't checked the bathrooms after closing the lobby. This was part of my responsibilities, and sometimes the homeless would try to hide there to spend the night. I sat in my car, thinking about my options. I just wanted to go home, but I knew that if I just left and someone was in the restaurant, I would be fired, and I needed the job, as I had just bought a new car. Once again, I parked my car and went inside. I rushed to the front, where the cashiers were, and I turned off the alarm. Then I called out, "Who's in here? Please, just come out. I promise I won't call the police." No response. I then made it to the bathrooms and checked the men's room, but I didn't find anybody. I then tried to check the women's room, but it was locked, but I did see that the light was on in there. It was a single-occupant bathroom with motion lights, so I was now convinced that someone was in there. I knocked and I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. All of a sudden, I felt a breeze, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I'm a big guy, and I'm not frightened easily, but at that moment, I got a horrible feeling, so I retreated back into my car. I tried calling the general manager, but he didn't answer. I then called Mark, hoping he wouldn't mind coming to help me get to the bottom of this. Mark answered, and to my surprise, it didn't take too much convincing for him to agree to come to help me. Mark arrived about 10 minutes later, still in his work clothes. It was close to 1 a.m. now, and he could see that he was not happy to be there. I'd already explained what was happening to him over the phone, so when he showed up, we went straight in. On the way to the bathrooms, I grabbed a broom in case things got physical. I attempted to open the door with Mark behind me, ready in case anybody jumped out. I twisted the knob, and the door opened. We looked inside, but it was empty. I could see Mark was getting angry at me for wasting his time, but I convinced him to look at the camera footage. On the security camera system, I rewound it all the way back to the first time I entered to set the alarm. The cameras traced all my movements in the restaurant, even the part where I tried to open the bathroom door. Mark saw the confusion on my face as I saw the footage, and he softened up a little, saying,
"Hey kid, maybe the door was just stuck, and the shadow you saw was just some shadow that was cast by the nightlights."
I thought maybe he was right, but I still asked him to come with me to set the alarm. We went out the back door again and made it to our cars. I thanked Mark for coming and said that I was sorry I made a big deal out of what appeared to be nothing. He told me not to worry, and we both got in our cars when the restaurant's alarm system went off. The sirens were so loud, and for a second, I just sat there hoping they would turn off by themselves. I did not want to go back in. I got out, and Mark did the same. I asked him if we should go in, and he said he wasn't sure, but maybe someone had been inside. The police station was right around the corner from the Burger King, so while Mark and I figured out what to do, a police car pulled into the parking lot, and an officer stepped out. He asked us what was going on, and I told him everything. I asked him to come inside with me and sweep the building just to be sure, and he agreed. We went inside. The three of us, Mark, the police officer, and I, turned the alarm off. The officer then checked the restaurant to make sure it was clear. He found nothing, but then suggested we look at the cameras to see if we could find out what set the alarm off. So we checked the cameras again, but saw nothing. I was half expecting to see someone running out the back door, as it's the only door you can open from the inside without a key. But again, there was nothing. I was so confused. What's going on? I asked myself. Regardless, the three of us headed out. On the way to my car, I asked the officer if he would mind escorting me to the bank to drop off the deposit bag at the drop-off chute. He agreed, and after that, I drove home. On my drive home, I was trying to come up with logical explanations for what had happened. I thought maybe someone wanted to get into the safe, or perhaps they were hoping that I would have left the deposit bag in the car, while I went back inside to investigate what was going on. Maybe someone had been inside, and the cameras just glitched up and didn't capture them. I called in on Sunday saying I was sick and would not be able to go to work. Mark did the same. I talked with the general manager on Monday and told him what happened. He agreed that perhaps someone had tried to rob the place, and he said he would talk to the regional manager to change policies so that the deposit drop-off would be the next morning and not at night. I then mentioned the events of the night to my friend Corey, who laughed, and he told me he warned me not to come back after I left for the night. Still, I wasn't convinced what had happened was paranormal. Fast forward about a month later, I was working a night shift on a Wednesday night. We were short-staffed, so Corey was working as the only cook for the shift. The only other person working with us was a cashier named Cynthia. I sent Cynthia to clean the bathrooms. It was extra slow that day, and thank goodness for that. I was in the front in case any customer walked in. All of a sudden, I heard Cynthia scream from the women's bathroom. I ran to her, and I found her crying. When she saw me, she hugged me and told me to close the door before it came back. I looked at her confused, but I did as she asked. I asked her what was wrong, and she said something had hit her. Like what? I asked. She said she didn't know. She lifted up her work shirt to show me her back. That's where I saw a red mark that looked like a handprint. My heart sank. I told her, let's go to the office right now. I locked the lobby doors and told Corey what was happening. We went into the office to check the security cameras. Cynthia had left the bathroom door open, and if left open, the cameras could see the bathroom sink area where she was cleaning. What we saw next had us questioning everything we knew to be true. In the video, we saw a barely visible black shadow standing behind Cynthia. We then see Cynthia jump in pain from getting hit, and this shadow leaves the bathroom and turns into a little white orb on the screen. I recorded the camera footage, took a picture of Cynthia's back, and sent it to the general manager, telling him we were going home for the night. He didn't question us. He just responded with an okay, and we went home. Cynthia never came back to work. Corey quit about a month later. I wanted to quit, but I had car payments to make, so I stayed for about a year after that incident. However, I never stayed alone at that Burger King ever again. On my last day at work, I was training my replacement, and as we were finishing up our duties, I passed on the advice Corey had once given me. Make sure not to come back inside after you've left for the night.
The creepy delivery driver I see each week, from Els-Peth. This story was written by me and submitted to Reddit 3 years ago. I no longer work in the department I mention in my story, nor do I identify or present as female anymore. So thankfully, I do not have these types of encounters anymore. Here's my original story as I wrote it 3 years ago. I work at a multi-billion-dollar retail chain, and besides my main other department, which is also in the back room, there is a second department I'm cross-trained in that I work in for a couple of hours each morning and every Saturday accepting deliveries. Now I'm of average build, not overweight, but not as slender as I used to be. I have kids, so I have a bit of a mommy tummy that I fought to get rid of for years. I think I look average, but used to get a lot of attention back in the day from young men. Around when I was in my 20 ES, I'm now in my mid-30 ES, and though I look a little younger, it's not by as much as it used to be. These days, the only guys eyeing me up are 10 plus years older than me, and yeah, usually not attractive either. I'm married and not looking for a replacement either. I love my husband. There's a good variety of delivery drivers who deliver to my store, and I know many of the regulars by name. Every now and then there's a new driver or a substitute driver for one of the companies, but for the most part, it's the same people. There's a regular driver who comes in every Saturday to deliver milk. We'll call him Mike. He's mid-50s and nearing retirement age for the company he works for. He's friendly and cheerful and always greets everyone happily. He also loves making jokes. He even does the shave and a haircut 2-bits knock on our bay door when he arrives. I've always thought he was pretty cool, and even said he was my favorite delivery driver since he's so nice. I think he may have gotten the wrong idea, though. When I first started there, the other lady who used to substitute in that department warned me that Mike was a terrible flirt and that he liked to try to get with all the ladies. I kind of shrugged it off. I didn't think it was a big deal. Over the past year, he's said that I'm his favorite receiving person and that I'm beautiful. He has been very flirty and even asked me out on lunch dates. I've always declined and told him I'm married. This hasn't deterred him in the least. He could care less about that. Mike has gotten friendly enough to even show me pictures and videos of trips he's been on and whatnot. Last week he showed me a video of the drive up his driveway and views around his 300 acres of land. I thought that was rather odd, though. I mean, why show someone your driveway all of a sudden and show off your land? What was his goal in this? He started calling me a nickname recently too, which no one had ever really called me, as it was something only my creeper dad ever called me. Even my husband knows to steer clear of that nickname because it triggers me. It's an obvious nickname for my name, but no one uses it. Kind of like Mike is a nickname for Michael or Kate for Caitlin. Well, yesterday, just before he left, he said something I wasn't expecting. Mike asked me if he could shrink wrap me and take me with him. I gave him a firm and immediate no. This immediately made me think of a murder that happened in my area before I moved out here, where a woman was saran wrapped by her boyfriend and dumped naked, and saran wrapped on the side of the highway. The police were never able to connect the guy to the murder, though the locals knew he had to be the one who did it, and I was told he left the area after that. The more I think of his question, the more creeped out I get. I wonder if I should report it to management or just tell him to cut that crap out the next time I see him as a warning. My company prefers people to tell harassers to stop before reporting an issue, but I'm not sure if this falls into that category or is creepy enough to be something I should just report right away. What do you guys think? All I know is I'm really uncomfortable having to see him again next Saturday when he delivers again. Update. I took my manager aside and told her the situation, and she agreed that it definitely wasn't appropriate and that she wants a written statement from me on the matter. So we'll see how it's handled. If he stops delivering to my store or stops being creepy, I'll know it's been handled properly. Update. I talked to my assistant manager on Friday, and she said that it was being handled by ethics, so not at the store level. I told her I was thinking of having my supervisor shadow me while the guy was there on Saturday. Saturday morning came though, and I felt like crap and really didn't want to have to deal with him on top of already feeling tired, so I just called out. Some poor support manager had to deal with him instead. I don't know how long it will take them to address the issue, but I hope it's soon. Update. So my case is back to being investigated at store level again. Did the statement and answered questions and whatnot. Won't know anything for a while, I'm guessing. Asked for any guarantees that they could keep me safe. None were given. They just said they're looking into it and that if I have further issues to notify them. Oh yeah, that makes me feel so much safer. Totally. Update. Today I was anxious to go to work as I know it's the day that creepy guy delivers milk. The closer it got to 7:30 a.m., the more nervous I got. Just before 7:30 a.m., I went down to my other work area on the opposite side of the back room. It's a huge store, so it's approximately 600 feet away or so. When I got down there, I discovered that my supervisor wasn't there as I had feared, and my anxiety only grew. When I got back to my area, there were only a few merchandisers milling about, loading up their products onto carts and whatnot. I didn't see any other managers, including the one I had spoken to earlier in the day, to confirm that he would be present and nearby to give me some sense of security. In a moment of desperation, I thought back to what my coworker had told me just yesterday, and that was to ask a female coworker to stay with me and look out for me. So I asked one and she said yes. We waited in the back room, distracting ourselves with meaningless tasks to pass the time. Before I knew it, a half hour went by, then an hour, and then another half hour. No milk. I went to lunch and thanked my coworker for humoring me and staying nearby. After lunch, I checked to see if the milk ever came, but it hadn't. I was pretty happy I didn't have to see him for another week at least. Then later, I was pulled into the office at the end of my shift. The manager then told me that as of today, that man, Mike, is no longer permitted in our store. He can't deliver there or even shop there. So now they have to rearrange our delivery schedule for milk. But I honestly was just so relieved. I told the manager that I felt very relieved and thanked him for letting me know. It's like a weight has finally been lifted off my chest. So creepy delivery guy that used to deliver milk at my store, may we never meet again. The Work Stalker from So-Nora. A few years back, I had this really creepy experience with an older coworker of mine that still kind of shakes me to this day. It happened at this place that I'd been working at for a couple of years at that point. The place was a small factory of sorts with only less than a handful of employees, including myself. One day, though, my boss introduced us to this new older guy that he'd brought in to start working in the other, newer side of the factory. You see, the factory where he worked had two different sides to it, one side for beeswax and one side for wood production. My boss had brought him in because they went to church together, and the wood production on the other side had a religious significance. The new, older coworker worked there with us for about 1 month before he approached me one day and introduced himself to me. He seemed like a nice guy and even came back to give me a Hershey kiss not long after that. A couple months later, I got asked by our boss if I could go pick up my new older coworker, probably because his car was broken down or something. I agreed to it, so my boss asked me if it was okay to give the coworker my phone number so that we could coordinate via text. I said it was fine and went on my way. I brought him back to the factory with no problems. Soon after that, though, I started to get random and sporadic texts from him late at night. At first, the texts were just about us, maybe hanging out soon, while simultaneously apologizing to me because he knew he was much older than I. But then, the texts started to get pretty pervy, and they would be as long as a mini book. The texts were just long, misspelled, random, pervy compilations. I tried to just ignore the texts, but that only made them start coming more frequently. In the midst of all this, one day, my roommates were scrounging for a ride to a casino only a few miles from our house. I gave them a few dollars for a ride, and they said that they'd find their own ride back. So imagine my surprise when they returned only a couple hours later with their own ride all right. Their ride was my creepy coworker. Not only was I creeped the hell out that this pervy jerk now knew where I lived, but I also didn't know how he came to give my roommates that ride. Was it just sheer coincidence or something more? A few days after that, I went to visit a friend at his apartment that was located on our main street running through our small, historic downtown area. When I came downstairs from his apartment, as he was located on the second floor, I made my usual turn, walking on the sidewalk in front of all the main street shops. As I walked past one of the shops that was maybe 2 doors down from my friend's apartment, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, but it couldn't be, could it? To my great dismay, it was him, my creepy-ass older coworker, standing in the doorway of one of the shops and smiling creepily at me from under a black top hat. A couple of weeks after that little incident, I noticed him again as I left my friend's apartment. He was just standing on the sidewalk with that same creepy grin plastered on his gaunt face. Since I had already informed my friend after the last incident, I simply texted him real quick to let him know the creep was back. I got into my car and left after sending the text, so I didn't find out until later that the creepy coworker was gone by the time my friend got downstairs to the sidewalk. At that point, though, the texts were still coming even faster than before. He was even threatening to come by my house if I didn't respond. Long, provocative texts dictating what he'd like to have happen between us if he did just happen to show up at my house. When I would see him during the day at work, though, he would act as though everything were normal, giving no hint of his nighttime persona. After seeing him yet again as I left my friend's apartment, I just so happened to overhear a couple coworkers of mine standing around discussing how weird our new older coworker was. Right then I stepped in and joined the convo, finally showing one of my other coworkers the text messages that the creep had been sending me. I had been working with that particular coworker for a few years, but I didn't know him too well. He was one of those people who came off kind of grumpy and distant. Still, I told him and my other coworker not to say anything. They both nodded in agreement, and we went our separate ways to finish up for the day. When I came into work the next day, though, my boss immediately called me into his office. My boss told me that he'd been informed of the situation and the texts, and he wanted to see my phone to read them. I told my boss that I didn't really want to get anyone in trouble, but he said that was besides the point and that my situation needed to be addressed. My boss also stated that my older coworker had no right or reason to be texting me and talking to me the way he was talking to me. The boss must have had a pretty good talk with him because all the crap stopped from the older coworker after that. The other grumpy coworker of mine apologized to me for saying something to the boss, but I completely understood, and I was actually pretty grateful to him for that. I should have been the one to take the initiative to talk to the boss about it, but I was just too chicken. Fortunately, though, that situation seemed to work out for all involved, because life went on as usual and everyone involved acted as though nothing had ever happened. Well, I can't really say that because that situation actually caused the grumpy coworker and I to talk more, and we started dating. We were together for about 3 years and then we got married, so creepy old coworker, let's not ever meet again, or I think my husband will certainly have something to say about it. Restaurant kitchen encounter. Another story from So-Nora. At one point a few years back, I ended up working in a small, privately owned restaurant. It was set on a small main drag in a tiny historic community. The restaurant definitely stood out amongst the locals and tourists due to its multicultural food variety. The restaurant served everything from American cuisine to Indian, Thai, French, and Middle Eastern foods. The small restaurant was formerly a popular privately owned Chinese restaurant and a local favorite. But unfortunately, the older man that owned and operated it passed away inside the restaurant one day, so suffice it to say that the local townsfolk didn't take too kindly to the foreign city woman that bustled in shortly after his death and purchased his restaurant. Not only was my former boss flaky and irresponsible, but she could also come off as quite curt and rude at times. So she had a rough go at first obtaining the proper permits and whatnot in order to renovate the historic building. The thing is that when you do certain renovations in an old building like that, the local laws require you to then update a lot of other things that could be quite costly. So that meant that she decided to just use the staff that she'd hired, which was us, to help her with most of the renovation work. Everything was going pretty smooth, nothing out of the ordinary. That is until one overcast, drizzly day when we were all gathered in the dining area for a staff meeting. As we all sat there quietly, listening to the boss lady, something a little strange happened. The front entrance door to the restaurant suddenly opened to about halfway and then carefully closed after a second, as though someone had simply stepped in. Of course, there was no one there as the door was almost entirely glass and we would have seen a person on the other side. We all looked at one another confused, but we just chalked it up to be the breeze since the back door was open, though there was a set of closed kitchen doors in between. The second odd thing to happen happened to another employee when she was there alone one night. According to her, just after she turned a corner passing a shelf with some tools on it, an empty cordless drill case went flying past her head. It barely missed her and smashed into the wall in front of her. She definitely seemed pretty put off when she told us about it in the kitchen the next day. Following that, random small things would happen here and there, like our boss would ask us once in a while why one of us didn't come into her office when she'd see one of us walk by her open door. But we were usually puzzled by that, as none of us had ever even walked past her office during that time. Besides that, we'd get the occasional strange sound, like a faint voice or a door opening or closing. Also, when I'd be in the kitchen putting together some ingredients for a recipe and I'd have to walk away for a second to go grab another ingredient off the back shelf or something, but when I'd return less than 15 seconds later, one of the ingredients I'd set out prior to leaving the area would be gone. I'd end up having to measure out and prepare the same ingredient again. Annoyed. But I had no idea that it was about to get a lot more terrifying for me. The final thing to happen to me and my other coworkers was the worst experience I ever had that was paranormal hands down. But in order to properly explain this part to you, I'm going to need to explain a couple of things about restaurant kitchens to you. In a typical restaurant kitchen setup, you have a cook line, and the cook line is literally that. A line as in a skinny walking or standing space typically between the oven, fryers, and cooktop with the prep surfaces and small fridges on the opposite side, leaving about a 3 to 4 foot walking aisle forming a cook line. Besides that, there's a dishwasher outside of that line followed by the rest of what you'd expect to find in a restaurant kitchen. Like fridges and freezers, all on a large scale. You also got your giant hood fans above the cook area and a hot water heater. The reason why I point all those out is because together, they all constantly make noise. Think like louder ambient background noise constantly. So, this one day, there are 3 of us working in the kitchen. Me, my boss, and another employee on the dishwasher. My boss and I were on the cook line, while the dishwasher was a few feet away from the cook line. We were all 3 working as normal when all of a sudden it got quiet. Think of when you don't realize you've been hearing a constant low sound until it suddenly stops and then you notice the sudden change in the noise environment. Except for, it absolutely got dead silent. Almost like an invisible soundproof blanket got thrown over the 3 of us. As soon as I noticed it, I looked around at the other 2 and they also looked puzzled. "What the heck?" I questioned out loud. "Why is it so freaking quiet all of a sudden?" asked the dishwasher guy suspiciously. "I don't know," my boss replied, drawing out her words nervously. She turned to face me as I was standing directly behind her on the narrow cook line. "Nora, go make sure that the fridges and hood fans are still running. Maybe the power is out." So I ventured the 10 or so feet to outside the cook line area, and weirdly enough, I could hear the hood fans and even the dishwasher, hot water heater, and all the fridges and freezers running like normal. I went back to my boss and with a confused look told her, "Everything's working fine." That was the first creepy part of that. but when I stepped back onto the cook line to tell my boss, all was silent again. "Well, Nora, get back to work grilling those peppers," she snapped, so I got back onto the cook line beside her. After a couple of minutes, though, I suddenly started to get tunnel vision, and I felt really dizzy and nauseous. I told my boss, and she told me to go sit out back for a few minutes and get some fresh air, which I promptly did. As I was sitting outside trying to feel better, I could see my boss go into her office, which was kitty corner from the back door. Since the back door was open with just the screen door closed, I was able to hear her while she made a phone call. She sounded urgent and shaky as she asked the person on the other end of the line to please bring in an abalone shell, some sage, and some kind of weird oil. Now, the reason she needed those particular items was because, according to her, she had felt something walk through her on the cook line that wasn't good. The crappy part is that I was standing right behind her, inches away on that cook line. I waited for her to finish her phone call and return to the cook line before I went back in. By the time I got back in, everything sounded normal again on the cook line. When I got off my shift about an hour later, believe me when I say that I made the normally 45-minute drive home in just under 30 minutes. All night that night, I tossed and turned, unable to really sleep. But the few times I managed to slip into sleep, I kid you not, I got jolted right back awake because I would see a screaming demon-like thing right in my face.
Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at eriecast.com.